a 24-hour laundromat on a February morning in Portland, Maine. Steam breathing white out of a vent above the alley. And below it, a young woman asleep against the brick, with a green backpack under her head. The zipper is broken. Everything she owns is inside it. 3 miles south, in an office overlooking the harbor, a lawyer opens a folder on his desk. Inside is a photograph she has never seen, a property she has never heard of, and 2 keys, one silver, one brass, that a dying man spent the last 4 months of his life making sure she would hold. She does not know she is being searched for. She has forgotten how to be found. Somewhere north of the city, up a road that eventually stops caring what you want, a house is waiting. Old, leaning, missing shingles, and beneath its floor, behind a locked door no one has opened in 12 years, something is about to answer a question she stopped asking when she was 9. By the time she turned 24, Merritt Bennett had learned never to sleep too deeply in a place without a lock. Nobody taught her that. Life did. It was a Tuesday morning in February, and the alley behind the 24-hour laundromat on Cumberland Avenue smelled the way it always smelled in winter. Bleach and wet cardboard, and the faint sweetness of dryer sheets riding out on a vent she had learned to sit beside 3 years ago. The warm air came in slow pulses like something breathing. Merritt sat with her back against the brick, knees drawn up, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee somebody had left half-finished on top of a newspaper box. She never begged. If she could work, she worked. She washed dishes at a diner on Congress Street from 10 at night until 4 in the morning 3 days a week. She changed motel sheets at a place off Route 1 when the manager needed an extra pair of hands and didn't ask too many questions. When people asked her where she lived, Merritt gave the same small smile she had been giving for years. "I'm between places." It sounded better than homeless. Everything she owned fit inside the faded green backpack leaning against her hip. The zipper had broken 2 winters ago, and she had learned to fold the top over and clip it with a plastic clothespin she had picked up off a bathroom counter at a bus station in Bangor. 2 shirts, an extra pair of socks, a toothbrush wrapped in a plastic bag, a comb missing 3 teeth, and at the very bottom, flat against the seam so no one would think to look for it, a single photograph of her mother wrapped in 3 layers of plastic to keep out the rain. That was her life, small enough to carry, easy enough to leave with. What Merritt did not know, could not have known, sitting in that alley with her fingers stiff around a cup of cold coffee, was that one of the wealthiest men on the Maine coast had spent the last 4 months of his life trying to find her. While he searched, she slept. Church doorways when the wind came off the harbor, empty bus shelters when the shelters themselves were full, behind the laundromat when it dropped below 20. Once, in January of the year she turned 22, Merritt had stayed awake from midnight until sunrise, because the thermometer on the pharmacy sign across the street read -4, and she was afraid that if she let her eyes close, she would not wake up. She had counted the cars that passed, 17 in 6 hours. She remembered because it had felt important at the time to count something. Merritt was 9 years old, the winter her parents died. She remembered pieces of the funeral the way you remember pieces of a dream. Snow melting on black wool coats, a metal thermos of coffee somebody had brought that no one drank. The way the adults leaned toward each other in the church basement afterward and whispered, as if grief was a child in the next room who might hear them and be frightened. And she remembered one man. Harlan Ashford had been her father's oldest friend. She knew this because her father had said so more than once, with the particular warmth he saved for people he trusted. Harlan had come to the house for Sunday dinners twice a year, tall and broad-shouldered in a wool jacket that always smelled faintly of pipe smoke. And he had once given Merritt a wooden box, carved with a small ship on the lid because he said a girl should have somewhere to keep her secrets. After the funeral, Harlan had found her sitting alone on the wet church steps. He had knelt in front of her, And she remembered because his expensive gray trousers had sunk straight into the slush, and he had not seemed to notice. His eyes were red. His hands were shaking. "I'll make sure you're taken care of, Merritt," he had said. "I promise you that. I promise." She had believed him. She was 9. At 9, you still believe adults understand the weight of a promise. That night, Merritt slept with her shoes on because no one had told her where she would be living the next morning. Harlan Ashford never came back. 15 years passed. Foster homes became temporary rooms. Temporary rooms became shelters. Shelters became sidewalks. Somewhere in the middle of all that, Merritt stopped waiting for anyone. The bell above the soup kitchen door jingled the way it always did, and Merritt did not look up. She was warming her hands around a paper cup at the corner table by the window, the way she always did on Tuesdays, when the polished shoes stopped beside her chair. Brown leather, recently shined. The cuffs of the trousers above them were dark wool with a faint pinstripe. Nobody wore shoes like that at St. Andrew's Soup Kitchen. Merritt kept her eyes on the coffee. Merritt Bennett? Her body went still. People who knew her full name rarely brought good news. Landlords she owed money to. Bosses who wanted the sheets stripped faster. A social worker who had once tried very hard to help her when she was 17 and had given up around the time Merritt turned 19. She looked up slowly. The man was in his late 60s, a dark wool overcoat, silver hair combed back the way lawyers combed their hair on television. He had the tired eyes of someone who had been driving a long time. "My name is Everett Kellner," he said. "I'm an attorney." Merritt almost laughed. It came out as a small, dry sound. "I think you've got the wrong girl." "No." His voice was gentle. "Careful. I've been looking for you for 11 days, Miss Bennett." Her smile disappeared. Everett Kellner sat down across from her without asking. He set a leather folder on the chipped formica table between them. He did not open it right away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her. And Merritt understood, in the way a person who has slept outside for a long time understands these things, that whatever this man was about to say, he had rehearsed it. "I have some difficult news," he said. Merritt waited. "Harlan Ashford passed away last week." For a moment she felt nothing at all. Then she remembered the wet church steps, the red eyes, the promise. She remembered the wooden box with the small ship carved on the lid, which she had lost in a foster home in Lewiston when she was 13, and which she had cried about for 2 nights straight before deciding never to cry about a lost thing again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Everett Kellner studied her face for a long time. "Miss Bennett," he said finally, "Mr. Ashford left specific instructions concerning you." She looked up. What kind of instructions? He opened the folder. He did not answer directly. Instead, he took out a single photograph and slid it across the table. It was old. The color had gone the yellow-green of photographs from a certain decade. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a canvas jacket stood on a wooden porch holding a small girl on his hip. The girl was maybe 4 years old, laughing at something the man had just said. One small hand pressed against the side of his face. Merritt did not recognize the porch, but she recognized the girl. Her throat closed. "He kept this," Everett Kellner said quietly, "in his desk for 30 years. Merritt could not speak. The attorney closed the folder. "He left you a will, Miss Bennett," he said, "and I would very much like you to be present for the reading." Outside, a slow snow had begun to drift down over Portland Harbor. Merritt did not know it yet, but before the week was out, she would be given the first house that anyone had ever called hers. Everyone else would call it worthless, a ruin, a dying man's mistake. But 15 years after Harlan Ashford had made a promise to a frightened little girl on a wet church step, Merritt was about to learn something far more painful than being forgotten. Harlan had remembered her, and somehow she had still ended up on the street. 3 days later, Merritt stood outside a law office on the top floor of a building overlooking Portland Harbor, and she wondered if she should leave before anyone noticed her. It was an old habit. Leave first. before someone asked you to. Her coat had come from a church donation bin on Forest Avenue. Her boots were clean only because she had spent 20 minutes wiping them in a public restroom at the bus station. She had washed her hair in the sink and combed it flat with her fingers. Everett Kellner had told her gently that she did not need to bring anything with her. Merritt had brought the backpack anyway. She always did. Inside the conference room, the light was silver and cold. A long table of dark wood. A window that ran the length of one wall, showing the gray water of the harbor and the small boats moored in it. Two people were already seated. The woman was perhaps 60. Silver blonde hair drawn back into a low twist. A cream-colored blouse. Pearl earrings that caught the light every time she turned her head. She was the sort of woman Merritt had seen in newspaper photographs, standing beside hospital directors and charity board members, holding oversized checks and smiling for cameras. She was beautiful the way expensive rooms are beautiful, deliberately. The man beside her was in his mid-30s, dark suit, a face that had once been handsome and was now soft around the jaw. His eyes moved from Merritt's donated coat to her scuffed boots to the faded green backpack on her shoulder, and something small and cold moved through his mouth. "Seriously," he muttered. "Sterling," the woman said softly. "Not sharp, just a warning." Everett Kellner pulled out a chair for Merritt. "Miss Bennett," he said, "this is Vivienne Ashford, Harlan's wife, and their son, Sterling." Merritt sat down. She placed the backpack carefully between her feet. Vivienne Ashford watched her do it. "You can leave that by the coat rack, dear," she said. Her voice was warm. "Practiced." "I'm fine," Merritt said. Vivienne smiled. It was a small, patient smile, the kind of smile people give to a child at a dinner table who has refused to try the fish. "Of course." Everett Kellner opened his folder. Harlan Ashford had lived in a world Merritt could barely imagine. A waterfront estate on Cape Elizabeth. Investments, two commercial marinas, a shipping company called Ashford Maritime that had been in his family for 3 generations. As the attorney read, Merritt tried to make herself very still. She had learned a long time ago that when you did not belong somewhere, the best thing to do was to take up as little space as possible. Vivienne received the coastal home and the bulk of the public wealth. Sterling received shares in Ashford Maritime and interests in a commercial marina south of Portland. Everett Kellner read each provision in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who had read hundreds of wills, and Merritt stared at her hands and thought, over and over, that she should not be in this room. She had not expected money. She had not expected anything. Still, some small, stupid part of her had wondered on the bus ride down that morning if Harlan had left her a letter. Some kind of explanation. Some reason for 15 years of silence. Everett Kellner turned a page, and to Merritt rose Bennett. Merritt looked up. "I leave the property known as 42 Blackpine Road, outside Ashford, Maine, including the residence and approximately 18 acres of surrounding land." She blinked. "I'm sorry," she said. "What?" The attorney looked at her over the top of his glasses. His face was neutral, professional. "Mr. Ashford left you a house, Miss Bennett." Sterling laughed, just once. A short, sharp sound. "Oh, come on. Blackpine? That place is still standing?" Merritt turned toward Vivienne. "You know it." Vivienne folded her hands on the table. Her rings caught the light. "I've seen it," she said. "The property has been neglected for many years. The house is very old. I doubt the plumbing even functions. It's a shack," Sterling added. "Mom's being generous." Merritt turned back to the attorney. "Is it mine?" "Yes." "Is there a mortgage?" "No." Something inside her went very still. No mortgage. No landlord. No shelter curfew. No one telling her at 6 in the morning to gather her belongings and leave. She looked down at the backpack between her boots. "It has a door," she said. Sterling frowned. "What? Does it lock?" Nobody answered right away. Everett Kellner cleared his throat. "Yes." Merritt swallowed hard. "Then it's more than I had yesterday." The room went quiet. Vivienne Ashford leaned forward, just slightly. When she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been. "Merritt," she said. "May I call you Merritt?" Merritt did not answer. Vivienne continued as if she had. "Harlan could be sentimental, especially toward the end. He carried certain regrets. I don't fault him for that. But you shouldn't confuse an emotional decision with a practical one." She offered, with the smoothness of a woman who had made such offers before, to have the property professionally evaluated. Perhaps even to purchase it herself. To save Merritt the burden. "Why would you want a deteriorating house?" Merritt asked. For half a second, no longer, Vivienne Ashford's smile changed. Most people would have missed it. Merritt did not. Living on the street teaches you to notice small things. A glance that lingers on your backpack. A hand that drifts toward a security phone. The precise moment when kindness becomes inconvenience. Vivienne's smile came back into place before it had ever really left. "Land," she said, "can always be useful." Everett Kellner cleared his throat. "There is one additional item." He reached into the folder and withdrew a thick red envelope. Across the front, in unsteady handwriting, Merritt did not recognize but somehow felt she should, was a single word. Merritt. Her heart tightened. "Mr. Ashford instructed me to give this to you only if you attended in person," the attorney said. Vivienne's expression became very still. Everett Kellner reached into the folder a second time. He set a small brass key on the table beside the envelope. Old, heavy, the metal worn smooth in the places a thumb would rest. Merritt picked it up. It was warmer than it should have been. "This isn't the house key," she said. "No." He slid a second key across the table. This one was ordinary. Silver, new cut. "The silver one opens the front door of 42 Blackpine Road," Everett Kellner said. "The brass one." He paused. "Mr. Ashford did not tell me what the brass one opens." Merritt looked at the two keys lying side by side on the dark wood. Across the table, Vivienne Ashford was no longer looking at Merritt. She was looking at the brass key. Her face, for one full breath, had gone the color of the harbor water outside the window. It lasted only an instant. Then she reached for her coffee cup with a hand that was not quite steady, and she took a small, careful sip, and then she smiled again. But Merritt had seen it. You do not survive 15 years on the street without learning to read the exact moment a person becomes afraid of you. Vivienne Ashford stood a few minutes later. She paused beside Merritt's chair. "I truly am sorry for what you've been through, dear," she said softly. "Take some advice from an older woman. Sell the property. Take whatever money you can get." Her eyes dropped briefly to the backpack between Merritt's boots. "You've spent your life carrying too much already." Then she was gone. Sterling followed her, muttering something Merritt did not catch. Merritt waited until the door closed behind them. She waited until she could hear the elevator ping down the hall. Then she looked at the attorney. "Mr. Kellner, yes. Did Harlan ever tell you why he left me the house?" Everett Kellner took off his glasses. He polished them on a corner of his tie for longer than he needed to. When he looked at her again, his eyes were tired. "He said one thing," he answered. "He said, Vivienne notices what things cost. And Merritt notices what they mean." Her throat closed. She opened the red envelope in the elevator, alone, because she could not wait until she was on the sidewalk. Inside was a single card. 3 lines, written in the same unsteady hand. "You survived because you learned to see what others ignore. Do not trust what appears worthless. Go home, Merritt." She read the last line twice, then a third time. The tears came quietly, the way she had learned to cry in shelters where other people were sleeping. No sound, just water on her face and the tightness of holding her breath. No one had told Merritt Bennett to go home in 15 years. Because until that moment, there had been nowhere for her to go. That afternoon, she boarded a northbound bus with the faded green backpack held against her chest. In the left pocket of her donated coat was the silver key to a broken house. In the right pocket was the brass key to something no one had explained. 3 rows behind her, near the back of the bus, A man in a dark jacket quietly raised his phone. He took a photograph of the back of Merritt's head. He typed 4 words and pressed send. She's on her way. By the time the bus dropped her at Ashford, the daylight was already sliding down behind the trees. The driver pointed north with 2 fingers, one hand still on the wheel. Blackpine Road is about 4 miles that way, straight up until the road stops caring what you want. Merritt looked out at the snow beginning to fall in slow, drifting spirals. "You got someone picking you up?" the driver asked. She gave him the same small smile she had been giving strangers for years. "I'll manage," she always did. The road narrowed as she walked. Houses disappeared one by one. The last mailbox she passed, leaning sideways from a snowdrift like a tired old man. Pine trees rose on both sides of her, dark and tall, closing off the last thin light of evening. Every few minutes, Merritt looked behind her. She could not have said why. Once, far down the road, she thought she saw a pair of headlights. She stepped off the shoulder into the trees. She waited. The headlights did not appear. Maybe it had been nothing. People who sleep outside learn to feel watched even when no one is there. Nearly 2 hours later, she found the mailbox. The numbers had faded to ghosts, 4-2, and below them, in smaller letters, Blackpine. She stopped at the edge of the property. Beyond the mailbox stood the house. Sterling had been right about one thing. It was almost a shack. The porch leaned 3 inches to the left. Half a dozen shingles were missing from the roof. One of the front windows had been covered from the inside with a sheet of plywood. Dead vines climbed the stone chimney and reached, brown and skeletal, toward the sagging gutter. Merritt stood in the snow at the end of the driveway. Then she laughed, a quiet, tired laugh that fogged white in the cold air. "You're beautiful," she whispered. Most people would have seen decay. Merritt saw walls, a roof, a front door. She walked up the driveway. She climbed the 3 steps to the porch. The wood groaned beneath her boots but held. She reached into her right pocket, then paused. She switched hands and reached into her left, the silver key. She slid it into the lock. It turned. The door swung inward on hinges that had not been oiled in a long time, and the smell of old wood and dust and something faintly like wood smoke came out to meet her. Merritt stepped inside. She closed the door. She turned the deadbolt. Then she checked it. Once. Twice. She checked it a third time. Only then did she breathe. The living room was small. A stone fireplace took up most of one wall. Furniture sat beneath white sheets that had gone gray with dust. The floorboards complained beneath her boots as she walked. The plywood-covered window let in a single blade of gray light along its bottom edge. There was no working heat, no electricity. In the kitchen at the back, the faucet gave one dry cough when she turned it and produced nothing else. Merritt did not care. She found an old iron in a hall closet and used it to knock the ice out of the fireplace flue. She gathered kindling from a woodpile on the back porch that someone had left tarped and dry. She built a small fire and sat down on the hearthstones and ate 3 crackers from her backpack and drank water from a plastic bottle. The fire was small. The room was cold at her back. But for the first time in 3 years, no stranger was sleeping 6 feet away from her. No shelter worker would turn on the fluorescent lights at 5:30 in the morning and tell her to gather her belongings. The door had a lock. The lock worked. She placed the backpack beneath her head. She lay down on the wooden floor near the fire. She closed her eyes. She was almost asleep when she noticed the ashes. Merritt sat up slowly. The fire she had built was small. New, fresh cedar over pine kindling. But beneath the fresh wood, when she looked at it now, was an older layer. Soft, gray, powdery ash. The kind that only forms after a fire has been fully burned out. Days old, maybe. A week at most. Someone had used this fireplace before her. Recently. Merritt looked at the front door. It was locked. She had locked it herself 3 times. The house became very quiet. Then, from the porch, a sound. Crack. The wet, splintering complaint of an old floorboard bearing weight. Merritt froze. Another sound followed. Another step, closer. Slowly, without taking her eyes off the door, she reached for the iron fireplace poker, leaning against the hearth. Her fingers closed around it, cold, heavy. The porch creaked once more, then the doorknob moved, not turned, moved, tested. Someone on the other side of the door was quietly checking to see if it was locked. Merritt tightened both hands around the poker. "Who's there?" No answer. The doorknob moved a second time, slower, then stopped. For a long moment, there was only her own breathing and the small crackle of the fire. Then a shadow crossed the thin blade of light beneath the plywood window. Merritt backed toward the fireplace. 3 hard knocks struck the door. She did not move. "Miss Bennett," a man's voice, slow, steady. Older. Merritt said nothing. "My name is Silas Rourke. Harlan Ashford asked me to watch this property." Harlan. Merritt did not lower the poker. "Prove it." There was a pause. Then on the other side of the door, the man laughed. It was a quiet, tired laugh, not mocking. Something almost like relief in it. "You've got more sense than Harlan gave you credit for," he said. A moment later, a photograph slid slowly under the door. Merritt crossed the room. She kept the poker in her right hand. She picked up the photograph with her left. It was old, the colors slightly faded. Harlan Ashford stood on the front porch of this house. Beside him, a decade younger but unmistakable, stood a broad-shouldered man in a canvas jacket. The two of them were holding fishing rods and smiling at whoever had taken the picture. Behind them, in the corner of the frame, Merritt could see the same leaning porch post she had walked past 20 minutes ago. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in blue ballpoint pen, "Silas and me, Blackpine, fall." Merritt walked slowly back to the door. She left the chain latched. She turned the deadbolt. She opened the door 2 inches. The man on the porch looked exactly like the photograph, only older. His beard had gone almost completely white. His eyes were the pale, weathered gray of a man who had spent a great many winters looking at the sea. His eyes dropped to the poker in her hand. "Good," he said. "Good. Never open a door in these woods without something in your hand." Merritt stared at him. "You knew Harlan." Silas Rourke's expression softened. Something moved behind his eyes that Merritt did not quite understand. "For 41 years. Then why?" she said, and her voice was steadier than she had expected. "Did he leave me this place?" Silas looked past her, through the crack in the door, toward the fireplace. His eyes found the small fire. Then slowly, they found the ashes underneath. "Because he hoped you'd notice." Merritt slid the chain free. She stepped back and let him in. Silas walked past her without a word. He did not go to the sofa or the kitchen or ask about the house. He walked straight to the fireplace, and he knelt in front of it, the way a man might kneel in front of an altar. For several seconds he did not speak. Then, with the side of his hand, he brushed the old gray ash aside. Beneath it, embedded in the stone of the hearth, was a small iron ring. Merritt's heart began to pound. "That wasn't there before," she said. Silas glanced up at her. "It was." He wrapped 2 fingers around the ring. "You just couldn't see it." He pulled. Somewhere beneath the floor of the house, deep in the foundation, a low mechanical click sounded, the sound of a heavy counterweight releasing. Merritt stepped back. A section of the stone hearth, a slab she would have sworn was solid rock, shifted upward on hidden hinges, tilted, and folded aside against the fireplace wall. Beneath it, a narrow set of concrete stairs descended into darkness. Cold, dry air rose from below, not the damp mineral smell of a cellar. Something cleaner, controlled, filtered. Merritt stared down into the opening. "What is this?" Silas stood up. His knees popped. He wiped his hands slowly on his jacket. "Harlan started building it 12 years ago." Merritt looked at him. 12. He nodded. She did the math without meaning to. 12 years ago, she had been 12 years old. She had been in her 3rd foster placement, a house in Lewiston, with 3 other kids and a woman who drank vodka out of a coffee mug starting at 4 in the afternoon. She had been sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a shared bedroom, and she had already learned to keep her shoes under the pillow because the girl in the next bed sometimes stole them. Her voice, when it came out, was very small. Did he know where I was? Silas did not answer right away. The silence hurt worse than a no. He knew enough to keep looking, Silas said finally. Merritt looked down into the opening. From somewhere at the bottom of the concrete stairs, a pale fluorescent light suddenly flickered on, triggered, she realized, by the movement of the stone above. She reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around the brass key, the one no one had explained, the one Vivienne Ashford had gone pale at the sight of. She looked at Silas. What's down there? His face changed. Not fear, not exactly. Something older than fear, something closer to sorrow. The reason, he said. Harlan spent the last months of his life trying to find you. Merritt swallowed. Then she took the first step down. The stairs were steep and narrow. 12 steps, she counted. At the bottom stood a steel door, heavy, seamless, painted the flat gray of a bank vault. No handle. Only an old brass lock at chest height, out of place against the modern steel. Merritt slowly took the brass key out of her pocket. Her hand was shaking. The key slid into the lock as if it had been made for it, because it had. Behind her, at the top of the stairs, Silas Rourke spoke quietly. Whatever you find in there, Merritt, remember one thing. She turned her head. He was silhouetted against the firelight above. An old man in a canvas jacket, looking down at her, as if he had been rehearsing this moment for a very long time. Harlan was ashamed. Her chest tightened. Of what? Silas lowered his eyes. Of how long it took him to find out what they'd done to you. Merritt turned back to the steel door. She took a breath. Then she pushed it open. The room behind the steel door was not filled with gold. There were no stacks of cash, no jewels, nothing that looked like the kind of treasure people whispered about in the shelters when they talked about dead men's houses. Merritt almost felt relieved. Instead, there were shelves, dozens of them. Gray steel filing cabinets lined one wall from floor to ceiling. Cardboard archive boxes were stacked neatly against another, each one labeled in the same unsteady handwriting she had seen on the red envelope. A long wooden desk stood beneath a row of low fluorescent lights at the far end of the room, and on it sat an old laptop computer beside a leather-bound journal. Everything was clean, dry, sealed against time. Merritt stepped inside. The steel door swung shut behind her with a soft, weighted click. She flinched at the sound but did not turn around. Silas had told her the door would close on its own. He had also told her that from the inside it opened with a simple lever. She was not trapped. She just felt suddenly very alone. "What is this?" she whispered. There was no one to answer. She walked slowly toward the desk. Her boots were loud on the concrete floor. The room smelled faintly of paper and old cedar and something else. A chemical dryness. The way rooms smell when someone has installed a dehumidifier and left it running for years. The journal on the desk had a name pressed into the leather cover. Harlan Ashford. She sat down. For a long moment, she only stared at it. Her hands rested flat on the desk to either side of the book. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Then slowly she opened it. The first page contained a single line. "If Merritt is reading this, then I finally found a way to bring her home." Her throat tightened. She turned the page. Harlan's handwriting was careful at first, neat, the precise, patient script of a man who had signed a great many contracts in his life. As the entries continued, week after week, month after month, the writing began to change. It grew heavier, then rougher. Then, in places, so angry that the pen torn small holes through the paper, she read. 3 years ago, Harlan had begun a routine review of Ashford Maritime's older accounts after the death of a longtime company accountant named Douglas Farrow. The review had been standard, expected, the sort of quiet housekeeping that happened when an old employee passed and someone new took over the books. It should have taken 2 weeks. It had taken 3 years. Because in the first month, Harlan had found payments he did not recognize. Transfers routed through consulting firms that did not appear to do any consulting. Money disappearing into trusts and shell companies, then reappearing in other accounts under other names. At first, he had believed someone was stealing from Ashford Maritime. Then he had found her name. Merritt stopped reading. She put a hand over her mouth. "My name is in here." The words came out before she realized she had spoken them aloud, and there was no one to hear her. She turned the page. After her parents had died, Harlan and her father had already prepared documents to protect her. A trust had been quietly funded years before, on a Sunday afternoon at her family's kitchen table, when Merritt had been 6 years old and playing with a dollhouse in the next room. She did not remember the day. Harlan wrote that he did. He remembered her father laughing about how paranoid Harlan was being, making arrangements for a little girl who was going to grow up perfectly safe. The trust had been funded to last her lifetime. Housing, education, medical care, and when Merritt turned 21, enough money to give her not a fortune, but a modest, secure beginning. She stared at the page. "I had money." Her voice sounded very small in the concrete room. "How much?" She did not know why she was asking. There was no one to answer. Perhaps she needed to hear it aloud. Perhaps she needed the number to have a shape. She kept reading, and the number arrived. By the time Merritt should have received her first payment at 18, the trust had grown to nearly $400,000. 400,000. She thought about it the way you think about a foreign language. The letters arranged themselves. The meaning refused to. $400,000 would have meant an apartment, a community college, a dentist for the tooth on the lower left that had been aching quietly for 2 years, a pair of boots she had chosen instead of taken, a refrigerator with food in it, a door with a lock and the certainty that the door would still be hers next month. $400,000 would have meant she never slept behind the laundromat on Cumberland Avenue. Not once. Not one single night. Merritt closed her eyes. She thought of the January she had turned 22, when the pharmacy sign had read -4, and she had counted 17 cars in 6 hours because she was afraid to sleep. She thought of the winter she had turned 19, in a shelter on Cumberland, where the woman in the next bunk had a cough that sounded wet and terrible, and Merritt had lain awake listening to her breathe, because it seemed important that somebody notice if she stopped. She thought of every application she had ever filled out that had asked for an address, and how she had learned to write the address of the shelter, and how she had learned that the moment she wrote it, the person on the other side of the desk stopped seeing her. She thought of every single one of those nights. There had been, by her rough count, more than 5,000 of them. Her hands began to shake. She turned the page. The first unauthorized transfer had been made when Merritt was 11 years old. $2,000. Small. The sort of amount that could hide inside a larger administrative movement. It had been described in the paperwork as a residential care adjustment. Then, 6 months later, another one, larger, then another. Then documents had been amended. Addresses on file had been quietly changed. Letters sent to her legal guardian had been returned as undeliverable, and no one had questioned it. Because on paper, Merritt Bennett was in the care of a long-term residential program with an excellent reputation. On paper, she had a home. On paper, her education was funded. On paper, Merritt Bennett was safe. She turned the page. Her name had been circled twice in red ink. Beside it, in Harlan's shaking hand, was another name, Vivienne Ashford. Merritt stopped breathing. The paper blurred in front of her. She read the name again. Then again. She thought dimly that there had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Vivienne had smiled at her that afternoon in the conference room. Vivienne had said, "I truly am sorry for what you've been through, dear." Vivienne ran charities. Vivienne had a foundation. Vivienne had stood in newspaper photographs beside hospital directors, holding oversized checks, smiling for cameras. She turned the page. Harlan had traced the money. The trust had been drained slowly at first, then as the years passed, more openly. The transfers had passed through a consulting firm called Bayline Advisory Group, which appeared in no phone book and had no physical office. From there, the money had moved to a non-profit called the Ashford Family Foundation. Merritt's fingers went cold. The Ashford Family Foundation. She knew that name. Everyone in Portland who had ever eaten at a soup kitchen knew that name. It was engraved on a brass plaque above the doorway of the community meal program on Preble Street. It was printed on the flyers for the winter coat drive. It was on the wall of the Cumberland Avenue Women's Shelter, on a small dedication panel by the front desk, beside a photograph of a smiling woman in pearls handing over a large check. The woman in the photograph. She had walked past that plaque 100 times. She had eaten meals paid for by that foundation. She had slept. For 2 months during the winter, she turned 20. In a bunk bed inside a shelter that had been partly funded by the Ashford Family Foundation. Her own money, passed through a woman who had stolen it from her, given back to her as charity, while that same woman stood beneath bright lights and was applauded for her generosity. Merritt lowered her head to the desk. She did not cry. Not yet. The sound that came out of her was quieter than crying. It was the small, dry sound a person makes when the whole world rearranges itself around them in a way they cannot yet feel. She thought, suddenly and very clearly, of a night 3 winters ago. She had been sitting on the floor of the Cumberland Avenue shelter beside a woman named Denise, who had come in with a bloody lip from a boyfriend and had been shaking so hard she could not hold a paper cup. Merritt had held the cup for her. She had listened while Denise cried, and she had thought very quietly to herself that at least the shelter existed, that at least someone, somewhere, had cared enough to build it. She had been grateful. She had been grateful to Vivienne Ashford. Merritt sat up. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She kept reading. The pattern was consistent for 15 years. Money moved out of Merritt's trust. Money moved into the Ashford Family Foundation. Money moved out of the foundation, in smaller and more scattered amounts, into private accounts held under the maiden name of Vivienne Ashford's mother. The final entry in the ledger portion of the journal had been made a little more than 2 months before Harlan's death. The line simply read, "I know now. God forgive me for how long it took." Merritt turned the page. The last section of the journal was different. The handwriting had gotten worse. Longer, drifting slants. Some words repeated. It was the writing of a man who was dying and knew it and was running out of time. "I promised a frightened child I would take care of her. Then I trusted paperwork more than I trusted my own eyes. There is no excuse for 15 years. Merritt closed the journal. She sat for a long moment with her hand flat on the cover, breathing slowly. Beside the journal was the laptop. She reached for it. The screen came alive at her touch. A single file sat on the desktop. It had been labeled with one word, Merritt. She clicked it. Harlan Ashford appeared on the screen. He was thinner than she remembered him. Much thinner. A blanket had been arranged across his legs. He was sitting in a leather chair in what looked like a study, and the light behind him was gray and low, the sort of light that comes through a window on a winter afternoon just before the sun goes down. For several seconds he said nothing. He only looked into the camera. His eyes were wet. Then he spoke. "Merritt." His voice broke on her name. She put both hands over her mouth. "I made you a promise when you were 9 years old," Harlan said. He looked down for a moment. His jaw worked, and I failed to keep it. She could not stop the tears now. "I could tell you I was busy. I could tell you I trusted the wrong people. Both of those things would be true. Neither of them would make what happened to you acceptable." He looked up. "I cannot give you back 15 years, Merritt. I cannot give you warm nights when you were cold. I cannot go back and sit beside a little girl who was sleeping with her shoes on because she did not know where morning would take her." Merritt froze. He knew. Somehow, at the end, he had known. Harlan's eyes filled again. But if you're watching this, Merritt, I need you to understand something. His voice softened. You were never forgotten. She closed her eyes. For most of her life, she had told herself the truth of her situation in one small, brutal sentence. No one thought far enough ahead to protect me. That sentence had shaped every foster home she had left, every shelter bed she had lain down in, every job she had lost because she could not shower on a Tuesday morning. It had been the quietest, deepest wound she carried, and she had carried it far longer than the backpack. Her parents had thought ahead. Harlan had thought ahead. Something had simply happened. Between their love and the life she had actually lived, she opened her eyes. Harlan was still speaking. There is more you need to know. He shifted in the chair. The blanket slid a little on his legs. He did not seem to notice. I want to tell you about the times I nearly found you. Merritt went very still. The first time, Harlan said quietly, was when you were 14. A caseworker made a mistake with a form. Your name appeared in a state database for a period of about 6 hours before it was corrected. I had a man at a firm in Augusta running weekly searches for me by then. He caught it. But by the time I made the drive north, you had already been moved. Merritt did not remember that. She had been in a group home in Waterville that year. She had not known anyone had been looking. The second time, Harlan said, and his voice grew heavier, was when you were 17. You applied for a job at a printing shop in Bangor. You put down a real address, a room you were renting above the shop from the owner. He was a decent man. I found the listing 3 weeks later, when the same man posted a notice looking for a new renter. I drove up the next morning. He paused. He told me you had left in the middle of the night without collecting your last paycheck. He did not know why. He said you had seemed frightened. Merritt remembered. She remembered the printer's name, Mr. Halloran, and the small room above the shop that smelled of ink and warm paper. She remembered the night a man had come into the shop asking for her by name, and the way Mr. Halloran had looked at her afterward, and how she had not waited to find out who the man was. She had left with the backpack over her shoulder before Mr. Halloran finished his second cup of coffee. She had assumed for 7 years that the man asking for her had been someone dangerous. She had never once considered that he might have been sent by someone trying to help her. The third time, Harlan stopped. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, he seemed to have aged another 5 years. The third time was the worst, he said, because I did not miss you by weeks. I did not miss you by days. He looked directly into the camera. I walked past you. Merritt's breath caught. You were 16 years old. It was a Thursday in November. I was at the Portland Transportation Center, the bus station on Thompson's Point, meeting a business associate of the noon Concord coach from Boston. It was raining. I was in a hurry. His voice thickened. I passed a bench near the ticket window. There was a girl asleep on it. She had a green backpack. Her arms were wrapped around it. She was wearing a coat that was too big for her, and one of her shoes had a hole in the toe. He stopped. I remember thinking she looked cold. Merritt's hand was pressed hard over her mouth. She could not have spoken if she had wanted to. I did not stop Merritt. He was crying now. I did not stop. I told myself she was somebody's daughter. Somebody was looking for her. Somebody would come. He drew in a long, unsteady breath. 3 weeks later, I saw a photograph in a file the man from Augusta sent me. It was a picture that had been taken outside a shelter intake center in South Portland. You were in it. You were wearing the same coat. He shook his head slowly. I have thought about that bench every day for 8 years. Merritt closed her eyes. She could see herself on it. She had been 16. She had run away from a foster placement in Sanford 3 days earlier. She had ridden a bus north with the last of her babysitting money because she had heard there was a shelter in Portland that would take unaccompanied minors without calling the state. She had fallen asleep at the station because she had walked all night the night before, and she remembered. She remembered waking up cold with rain on the windows and thinking that a man in an expensive coat had walked past her a moment before she opened her eyes. She had thought at the time that he had looked kind. She had thought about it for a few seconds. And then she had gotten up and gone to find the shelter, and she had never thought aught about him again. Until now. I could have touched your shoulder, Merritt, Harlan said on the screen. I could have said your name. Everything after that day would have been different. He wiped his face with the flat of one hand. I am not asking you to forgive me for that. I do not deserve to be forgiven for that. I am telling you because you deserve to know that you were not invisible. You were seen. You were seen, and I failed to look twice. Merritt lowered her head against the desk. She cried the way she had never allowed herself to cry in a shelter or a bus station or a doorway. Loud, ugly. The whole locked room absorbed the sound and gave nothing back. When she was able to look up again, Harlan was still speaking softly on the screen. There is one more thing I have to tell you, he said, and it is important. He looked directly into the camera. Vivienne knows I discovered the accounts. Merritt went very still. I do not know how much she has pieced together, but she has known for at least 6 months that I was reviewing the older ledgers. She will assume that whatever I found is in this house. She will assume it because I built this room to be the last place a woman like Vivienne would ever look. She has believed for 20 years that this property is worthless. I trusted that belief more than I trusted a safe deposit box in Boston. He paused. If you are watching this, Merritt, then she has already tried to take the house from you. Or she is about to. He was quiet for a long moment. She will not come with lawyers first, he said. She will come with kindness. That is how she works. She will smile at you and offer you money. She will tell you that she is trying to protect you. She will make it sound reasonable. She will make it sound generous. His eyes hardened. Do not sell her the house, Merritt. He took a slow breath. And do not trust the people I trusted. The screen went black. Merritt sat in the low fluorescent light with her hands flat on the desk. For a long time, she did not move. Do not trust the people I trusted. She thought of Everett Kellner in the conference room, polishing his glasses on the corner of his tie for longer than he needed to. She thought of the way he had looked at her when he said one thing. She thought of the way Vivienne had gone pale at the sight of the brass key, and how Everett Kellner had produced it from the folder without hesitation, as if he had known exactly what he was handing over. She stood up. She walked back up the concrete stairs. Silas was still where she had left him, sitting quietly in the chair by the fire. He looked at her face and did not ask. He said not to trust the people he trusted, Merritt said. Silas nodded slowly. He told me the same thing before he died. Who did he mean? Silas was quiet for a moment. I would start with the man who read you the will. 2 days later, Vivienne Ashford came for the house. She did not come with lawyers. She came with coffee. Merritt saw the black SUV through the front window at 9 minutes past 9 in the morning. Her first instinct, the 15-year-old instinct, was to reach for the backpack. Her hand actually moved. Then she stopped. The backpack was hanging over the back of a kitchen chair. She left it there. She opened the door. Vivienne stood on the porch holding 2 paper cups from a coffee shop in Portland. Sterling stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking at the leaning porch post as if it had personally offended him. I thought we might talk, Vivienne said. Her smile was warm. Merritt looked at the cups. No, thank you. Vivienne's smile did not change. May we come in? No. That surprised all 3 of them. Sterling stepped forward. We'll give you $200,000 for the property, cash, this week. No greeting, no preamble, just a number. Merritt looked at him. She thought about $200,000. She thought about an apartment, a refrigerator. Boots she chose instead of took. She thought about the fact that Sterling had raised the offer by $50,000 without her asking. Why is this house worth $200,000 to you? She said. You called it a shack. Sterling's jaw tightened. Vivienne stepped between them smoothly, the way she had stepped between many things in her life. Merritt, my son can be impatient. I noticed. For half a second, Vivienne's smile disappeared. Then it returned, softer. I knew your parents, she said quietly. Merritt went still. It was a simple sentence, but Vivienne knew exactly where to place it. Your mother was a lovely woman. Your father was deeply loyal to Harlan. You knew them. Of course. Then you knew about me. Silence. Sterling looked at his mother. Vivienne's expression did not change, but she looked away first. It lasted less than a second. Merritt saw it. She stepped forward on the porch. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You donated money to the Cumberland Avenue shelter. Vivienne blinked. I donate to many organizations. I slept in one. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The wind moved through the pines at the edge of the property. I'm not selling, Merritt said. Sterling laughed once, short and sharp. You haven't even seen a contractor's estimate. I said no. You don't know what you're doing. That hurt. Because it was true. Merritt knew how to find a warm place after midnight. She knew which diners gave away day-old bread at closing time. She knew nothing about trusts and corporate ledgers and property law. Sterling saw the doubt cross her face. You'll lose this place inside a year, he said. Taxes come due. Roofs collapse. Lawyers cost money. You think owning a house makes you safe. He smiled thinly. You're still homeless. You just have an address now. The words landed exactly where he had aimed them. Merritt's hands curled at her sides. Vivienne turned to her son. Go to the car. Mom, now. Sterling walked back down the steps. Vivienne stayed. For the first time, her voice lost its warmth. Take the offer, Merritt. Why? Because some doors, Vivienne said quietly, are safer left closed. Merritt held her gaze. I'll think about it. The SUV disappeared down Blackpine Road. Merritt waited until she could no longer hear the engine. Then her knees gave out and she sat down on the porch step. That evening, Silas drove her into Bangor. Adelaide Delaney was 68 years old, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and had the unnerving habit of remaining completely silent until other people said more than they had intended. She read Harlan's documents for 2 hours without speaking. Merritt waited. Finally, Adelaide took off her reading glasses and folded them carefully on the desk. Vivienne Ashford has spent 20 years building a reputation for generosity. I know. Hospital boards, children's charities, housing programs. I know. If this becomes public, Adelaide said, people will ask one question. Merritt waited. Adelaide looked directly at her. Why should they believe a homeless girl over Vivienne Ashford? The old Merritt might have looked down. She did not. They shouldn't. Adelaide raised one eyebrow. They should believe the records. For the first time, Adelaide Delaney smiled. Just at the corner of her mouth. Good answer. She closed the folder. If we do this, Merritt, we do not threaten Vivienne. We do not go to the press. We do not make accusations we cannot prove. What do we do? Adelaide slid the folder across the desk toward herself. We follow every dollar. 6 weeks later, the phone rang before dawn. Adelaide's voice was quiet. Careful. Merritt, I need to tell you something before you hear it another way. Merritt sat up on the floor beside the fireplace. There is a reason, Adelaide said, that Vivienne knew about the brass key before you did. Merritt closed her eyes. Everett Kellner. There was a pause on the line. How did you know? Harlan told me not to trust the people he trusted. Adelaide exhaled slowly. Everett has been on Vivienne's private payroll for 15 years. We have the bank records. Small amounts. Regular. Filed under legal consulting. It began the same month your trust was first drained. Merritt did not speak. The first man who had ever looked at her with kindness after Harlan's death. The man who had knelt beside her in the soup kitchen, who had said, I've been looking for you for 11 days, had known. He had known for 15 years. He had sat across a table from her 9-year-old self. On paper, he had watched the money disappear. He had signed things. He had polished his glasses on his tie, and he had let her sleep in doorways. "Merritt," Adelaide said gently. "Are you there? I'm here. There is more. Vivienne's attorneys have filed to place the property in temporary receivership. They are claiming Harlan was not of sound mind when he executed the will. If a judge grants the motion, we lose control of who sees what and when." Merritt looked at the fire. "When? The hearing is in 9 days. She did not sleep that night. At 3 in the morning, she stood up from the floor and did what she had done hundreds of times before. 2 shirts, socks, toothbrush, her mother's photograph. Everything went into the faded green backpack in under 3 minutes. 15 years of practice made leaving easy. She pulled on her coat. She put the backpack over one shoulder. She stood at the front door with her hand on the deadbolt. Sterling's voice returned to her. "You're still homeless. You just have an address now." Maybe he was right. Maybe people like her did not keep houses. Maybe safety was something other people inherited. She closed her eyes. Then, for reasons she could not have named, she did not open the door. She turned around. She walked, still wearing the backpack, back through the living room. She went down the concrete stairs. She sat at Harlan's desk in the low fluorescent light. She put her hand on the leather cover of the journal. "I tried," she whispered. There was no one there to answer. Her hand slid slightly, and the journal shifted off the desk. It struck the concrete floor and fell open near the back cover. Merritt bent to pick it up. Then she stopped. There was handwriting inside the leather of the back cover. One sentence. She had never noticed it before. She had not been meant to notice it before now. "A home is not a place no one can remove you from." Below it, in the same shaking hand, Harlan had written one more line. "A home is where you finally decide to stay." Merritt read the words once, then twice, then a third time. Her hand slowly moved to the strap on her shoulder. She thought of the 9-year-old girl who had slept in her shoes because she did not know where morning would enter her. She thought of every foster home she had left quietly, every shelter she had disappeared from before curfew, every doorway, every time she had gone before anyone could tell her she was not wanted. She thought about how Vivienne did not need to win in court. She only needed Merritt to run. Merritt lifted the strap over her head. For a long moment, she held the backpack against her chest. Then she set it down on the concrete floor. "No," she whispered. Her voice shook, so she said it again. No, louder this time. She stood up. She walked back up the concrete stairs, through the living room, and into the kitchen. She opened the backpack. She took out one shirt and placed it in a kitchen drawer. She placed the socks in another. She set the toothbrush beside the sink. Then she unwrapped her mother's photograph. For 15 years, she had kept it sealed inside 3 layers of plastic. That night, she found an old wooden frame in the living room closet. She cleaned the glass on her sleeve. She placed her mother's photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. Not packed, not hidden, home. At 7 the next morning, she called Adelaide Delaney. "I need you to tell me the truth." Adelaide was quiet. "Are we going to win?" "I don't know." Merritt nodded, though Adelaide could not see her. "All right." Another pause. "Adelaide, yes, I'm staying." There was a long silence on the line. When Adelaide spoke again, her voice was softer than Merritt had ever heard it. "Good." From that morning on, something in Merritt changed. She stopped asking whether she belonged in the room. Instead, she started asking better questions. Adelaide handed her a stack of pale blue folders on a Tuesday and told her not to come back for a week unless she understood every page. Merritt sat at Harlan's desk beneath the house from 6 in the morning until the fluorescent lights began to buzz at midnight, and she read. She wrote unfamiliar words in a cheap spiral notebook and looked them up one at a time. Fiduciary, beneficiary, commingling, misappropriation. She read the same paragraph 6 times when she had to. She fell asleep with her cheek on the desk twice. Silas came by in the mornings and left coffee on the top step and did not knock. Somewhere in the third day, she found something the accountants had missed. Adelaide's forensic team had been tracing the money out of the Ashford family foundation and losing the trail whenever the transfers passed through what they called intermediary charitable partners. Small nonprofits, meal programs, winter warming centers. The auditors had marked those transfers as legitimate charitable disbursements because the recipient organizations were legitimate charities. Merritt read the list. She recognized every address on it. She had eaten at the meal program on Preble Street. She had slept in the warming center off Marginal Way. The night the wind chill dropped to 15 below, and every shelter bed in the city was already full. She had been turned away from the family shelter on Chestnut when she was 17 because she did not have a child, and she had walked 6 blocks in wet snow to the youth shelter on Oak. And both of those buildings appeared on the ledger in front of her. Vivienne had been hiding money inside a world she believed no wealthy person would ever examine closely. Merritt had lived in that world. She knew its hallways. She knew its back doors. She knew which shelters ran 2 intake shifts a night, and which ones only counted heads at midnight, and which ones had donation boxes near the front desk that no one really watched. She knew how a small nonprofit accepted cash. She knew what a receipt looked like from the inside. She stayed up all night writing. By morning, she had annotated 41 transfers the auditors had cleared. 19 of them, Merritt could prove, had been double-counted. The same donation had been claimed once against Vivienne's tax filings and once against the foundation's charitable disbursement reports. The rest were smaller. She drove to Bangor. Adelaide read the pages twice. Then she looked up over her glasses. "How did you see this?" Merritt shrugged the way she used to shrug when she was 9. "I've been on the other side of that door." Adelaide did not smile. She just nodded once and quietly moved the pages into her working file. That afternoon, at a diner across the street from the courthouse, an accountant on Adelaide's team spent 20 minutes explaining a transfer sequence to Adelaide, as if Merritt were not sitting at the table. Halfway through, he leaned back and said, "Ma'am, if it would be easier, your client can wait outside while we go through the numbers." Adelaide slowly took off her reading glasses. Merritt touched her arm. "No," she said. Then she looked at the accountant. "Page 47, she said. "The transfer dated March 8th. Why was it routed through a housing charity before it reached a private consulting company?" The accountant stared at her. He looked down at his own file. He turned to page 47. For a moment, he did not speak. Then he said, "That's a good question." He never asked her to wait outside again. The hearing was moved once and then moved again. In the meantime, the story went public. The first photograph appeared online, 11 days after Adelaide filed her response. It was Merritt at 19, standing outside the Portland bus station, head down, the green backpack over one shoulder. The headline read, "Homeless Woman Claims Connection to Ashford Fortune." By evening, 7 other outlets had picked it up. One television commentator asked, on air, why a respected businessman would leave property to a transient with no known career. Merritt read the word transient twice. Then she turned off the phone. Adelaide called before dark. "Don't read the comments." "I already did." "Then stop. Someone wrote that I probably targeted Harlan. I know. I hadn't seen him since I was 9. "I know that too." Merritt sat for a long time in the kitchen with the phone against her ear. "Adelaide." "Yes." "Do you think we're going to win?" "I don't know." "Do you think we should?" Adelaide was quiet for a long moment. Yes. The morning of the hearing was gray. Merritt wore a plain charcoal jacket Adelaide had helped her find at a resale shop in Bangor. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands were empty. The green backpack was not with her. It was at home, on a hook by the kitchen door, and the thought almost made her smile as she walked up the courthouse steps. At home. Inside, the courtroom was quieter than she had expected. She had imagined shouting, angry attorneys, cameras pushed toward her face. Instead, there was only the soft shuffling of paper and the low mechanical hum of an old heating system. Vivienne Ashford was already seated at the opposing table. Navy suit, pearls, silver blonde hair drawn back into the same low twist. She was reading a small leather notebook, and her face was perfectly calm. And if you did not know the story, Merritt thought, you might have trusted her. Sterling sat behind his mother. He looked tired, older somehow than he had looked 6 weeks ago on the porch at Blackpine. His eyes flicked once toward Merritt and away. Merritt took her seat beside Adelaide. The judge entered. Everyone stood, and the truth began. Adelaide did not tell the court that Merritt had been homeless. She did not ask anyone to feel sorry for her. She presented dates, signatures, trust records, wire transfers. She walked the judge through the ledger entries one at a time, in the flat, patient voice of a woman who had done this before, and she connected each transfer to a subsequent movement of funds. Money intended for Merritt's housing had moved through a consulting firm called Bayline Advisory Group. For from Bayline, it had moved into the Ashford Family Foundation. From the foundation, it had moved back out, sometimes into legitimate charitable programs, sometimes into private accounts held under the maiden name of Vivienne Ashford's mother. Quiet theft, hidden beneath generous names. Vivienne's attorneys fought every page. They called the transfers administrative errors, accounting confusion, decisions made by employees who were no longer alive to explain themselves. They pointed to the length of time between the earliest transfer, and Harlan's discovery of it. They pointed to the fact that Douglas Farrow, the longtime company accountant, had been the only person with signatory authority on several of the movements, and Douglas Farrow was dead. Adelaide waited. When it was her turn again, she said only, "Then we would like to call Sterling Ashford." Vivienne's head turned slightly. Sterling did not look at his mother. He walked to the witness stand. For nearly an hour he answered carefully. Yes, no, I don't recall. He kept his eyes on Adelaide's face and only occasionally on a point somewhere on the wall behind her. Then Adelaide placed a single document in front of him. "Mr. Ashford, is that your signature?" Sterling stared at it for a long time. "Yes. And did you authorize this transfer?" "I signed what I was given." "By whom?" He did not answer right away. Merritt watched him. She watched the small muscle in his jaw work. She watched his eyes lift, just once, toward the table where his mother was sitting. Vivienne did not turn her head. She kept her eyes forward. Her fingers on the polished wood of the defense table were perfectly still. "By my mother," Sterling said. Vivienne closed her eyes, only for a second. Merritt saw it. Adelaide's voice did not change. "Did she tell you the beneficiary was Merritt Rose Bennett?" Sterling looked at Merritt for the first time all morning. His face was tired in a way that surprised her. Not remorseful, not exactly. Something smaller, something more private. Later, out on the courthouse steps in the cold, Adelaide would tell her the truth of it. That Sterling's cooperation had not been a change of heart. Adelaide's team had found a second ledger, hidden in a bank in Boston, showing that Sterling had been quietly moving trust money into his own personal accounts for at least 4 years. The evidence was airtight. Testifying against his mother was the only path he had to a reduced sentence, and Sterling Ashford, Adelaide said, had always been a man who understood a transaction. Merritt would nod slowly. She would understand. It would not make her feel any better. But right now in the courtroom, Sterling was looking at her. "Yes," he said. One word. No thunder, no shouting. Sometimes the truth does not need to raise its voice. The court upheld Harlan Ashford's will. The disputed trust assets were ordered into protective control, pending a broader investigation. Vivienne's financial dealings were referred to both state and federal authorities. Everett Kellner's bar license was suspended within the week. The Ashford Family Foundation was placed under independent audit and, 3 months later, dissolved. Vivienne herself did not go to prison right away. Wealthy women rarely did. But her name came off 2 hospital boards and a museum. Her photograph came down from the dedication panel at the Cumberland Avenue shelter, and the plaque above the meal program on Preble Street was quietly replaced with a simple wooden sign that read, "Community Kitchen, open to all." Outside the courthouse, reporters waited on the steps. Merritt stopped at the top. "Miss Bennett, do you feel vindicated?" A year earlier, she would not have known what the word meant. Now she knew. She just was not sure it described what she felt. "No," she said. Cameras lowered slightly. "I feel sad." The reporters leaned closer. "My parents planned for me. Harlan tried to protect me. And people who were supposed to do the right thing decided no one would notice if one little girl disappeared inside the paperwork." Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. "There are a lot of people the world doesn't notice." Then she walked past them, down the steps, to Silas's old truck at the curb. She did not look back. Winter passed, then spring. The house at 42 Blackpine Road changed slowly, not all at once. Merritt did not rebuild it into anything grand. She fixed the roof one section at a time with a young roofer from Ashford named Danny, who charged her a fair price and taught her how to read a shingle count. She replaced the plywood-covered window with a proper pane of glass, and the light that came into the living room afterward surprised her every morning for a month. She repaired the porch one board at a time. Silas taught her how to use a circular saw. She cut off the tip of her left index finger against a table saw in April and drove herself to the emergency room in Bangor and had it stitched back on and drove herself home the same night. She held the wheel with her right hand and she cried quietly most of the way, but she did not go anywhere but home. She learned things about herself she had not known. She liked yellow kitchens. She liked curtains open in the morning. She hated decorative pillows on principle. She thought coffee should be strong enough to stand a spoon in, and that people who put sugar in tea were not to be trusted. Small things, ordinary things. The kind of things a person only learns when they stay somewhere long enough to have preferences. The recovered trust money gave her more than she had ever imagined having. For several weeks, she did nothing with it. It sat in an account in Portland, quietly earning interest, and every night Merritt looked at the statement and felt nothing at all. Then, one cold evening in late April, she drove past the bus station. There was a young woman sleeping against the wall by the ticket kiosk. Her jacket was too thin. Her backpack was wrapped around one arm the way Merritt had once wrapped her own. Merritt kept driving. She made it 3 blocks. Then she turned around. She did not have a plan when she pulled back into the lot. She did not know what she was going to say. She parked. She sat behind the wheel for a moment. Then she got out, walked over, and sat down on the concrete a few feet from the young woman. The young woman opened her eyes. She saw Merritt. Her arm tightened on the backpack. "I'm not police," Merritt said quietly. "I'm not from the shelter. I'm not going to tell you where to go." The young woman said nothing. "I have a house about an hour north of here," Merritt said. "It's warm. There's food. There's a door with a lock on it. You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to answer questions. You can leave in the morning." The young woman stared at her. "Why?" she said. Merritt looked at her for a long moment. "Because somebody should have done this for me." She did not go home with Merritt that night. She could not. Trust does not work that way, and Merritt of all people knew it. But the young woman took the card Merritt handed her, a small white card with only Merritt's first name and a phone number on it, and she did not throw it away. 6 weeks later, she called. Her name was Nora. She was 20. She stayed at Blackpine for 4 nights, ate 3 meals a day, took 2 showers, and left on the 5th morning with a bag of food, a bus ticket to Bangor, and an appointment for a dental cleaning Merritt had made for her. Merritt watched her walk down the driveway toward the road. Then she went inside and called Adelaide. "I want to build something." 6 months later, ground broke on the 18 acres. Not luxury homes, nothing that would show up in a magazine. 8 small cottages, arranged in a loose crescent, through a clearing in the pines behind the main house. Each one had a bedroom, a bathroom, a small kitchen, a front door with a lock. Each one had a mailbox at the road with a real address on it. Adelaide helped Merritt set up the nonprofit. Silas supervised the construction. Danny the roofer became the site foreman and taught himself carpentry as he went. Merritt named the place Ashford Harbor, not because Harlan had been perfect. He had not been. But because Harlan had, at the very end, understood that regret meant almost nothing unless it turned into action. The first residents arrived in November. Merritt stood on the porch of the main house as the county van pulled up to the mouth of the driveway. It was cold. The pines behind her were dark. She had asked Silas to wait in the kitchen because she wanted, for reasons she could not have explained, to meet the first one alone. A young woman stepped down out of the van. She was 19, thin, brown hair pulled back with an elastic that had lost most of its stretch. She was wearing a coat that was 2 sizes too big for her. She carried a black backpack. She held both straps tightly at her chest. Merritt recognized the grip. "Hi," Merritt said quietly. The young woman nodded once. She did not smile. "Your room is ready," Merritt said. "It's the second cottage on the left." The young woman looked toward the crescent of small houses through the trees. Warm light was on in every window. Then she looked back at Merritt. "How long can I stay? Not where is it? Not is there Wi-Fi? Not what are the rules? How long can I stay?" Merritt's chest tightened. "We'll figure that out together." The young woman looked down at her boots. "Does the bedroom door lock?" For a moment, Merritt was 24 again, sitting in a law office overlooking Portland Harbor, asking that exact question about a broken house. "Yes," she said. "You'll have your own key." The young woman looked down quickly, but not fast enough to hide her face. "My name is Hazel," she said. "Hi, Hazel," Merritt said. "I'm Merritt." Hazel walked toward the cottage with her backpack still against her chest. Halfway down the path, she stopped. She turned. "Are you the one who owns this place?" Merritt thought about it. "I'm the one who lives here," she said. Hazel nodded once and kept walking. That night, Merritt sat in her kitchen with the light on above the sink, and she watched, through the window over the counter, the small yellow glow in the second cottage on the left. It stayed on for a long time. Around midnight, it went out. She sat there for a while after that, just watching the dark shape of the cottage against the pines. Then she went upstairs. In the bedroom closet, on a hook behind her winter coat, hung a faded green backpack with a broken zipper. Empty. Once that backpack had carried her whole life. Now it carried nothing. She stood in front of it for a long time. She did not throw it away. She had thought about it more than once over the past 2 years. She had never done it. She closed the closet door. She went to bed. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. 8 small houses stood in the dark clearing behind the main house. 8 locked doors, 8 sets of keys, 8 people who knew where they were sleeping in the morning. Time did what time does. Ashford Harbor grew. The 8 cottages became 12, then 16. A small common building went up between the 2 arms of the crescent. A kitchen, a dining room, a room with a couch and a bookshelf. Merritt did not run a program. She did not require sobriety or employment or church attendance. She asked only that residents keep their doors locked at night, that they treat one another with basic decency, and that they let her know if they were going to leave for more than 3 days so that she did not worry. Some residents stayed a month. Some stayed a year. A few stayed longer. Nora came back in the second winter and stayed for 18 months and left again in the spring on her own 2 feet, with a job at a bakery in Portland and a small studio apartment above it that she paid for herself. She sent Merritt a photograph of the studio on the day she moved in. The photograph showed a window and morning light and a small green plant on the sill. The bakery, 3 years later, sent muffins to Ashford Harbor every Sunday. Hazel Monroe never left, not because she could not. Merritt made sure everyone knew they could leave. Hazel simply, one autumn morning in her second year, walked over to the main house with a mug of coffee in her hand and asked Merritt if there was any work that needed doing. Merritt said yes. Hazel started keeping the books. Within 4 years, she was managing intake. Within 6, she was running most of the day-to-day operation, and Merritt had time, for the first time in her life, to sit on her porch with a book on a Tuesday afternoon and not feel guilty about it. Silas Rourke died in the 8th winter. He was 73. He went in his sleep in the small cabin at the back of the property Merritt had built for him, and he was buried under a stand of pines he had chosen himself. Merritt cried at his grave the way she had cried in the concrete room the night she read Harlan's video. She was a different woman by then, but the grief was the same shape. She had loved him. Adelaide Delaney retired that same year, but stayed on the nonprofits board until she was 81. She sent a fruit basket to Ashford Harbor every Christmas until she died. Merritt kept every card. The main house grew softer with the years. Merritt had the plywood window fully framed with wood trim. She painted the kitchen a color the paint store called Harvest Butter, and she called yellow. She kept her mother's photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. Beside it, eventually, she put a photograph of herself and Hazel at Hazel's community college graduation, and beside that a photograph of Nora's first daughter. The hidden door beneath the fireplace was never sealed shut. But it was never opened again either. Some nights in the winter, Merritt sat on the hearth and thought about it. About the small concrete room below, about Harlan's leather journal on the wooden desk, about a video file on an old laptop that she had watched exactly once and would never watch again because she did not need to. She did not need to. She remembered every word. On a night in the 10th winter of Ashford Harbor, the snow came down soft and slow the way it did some Decembers in that part of Maine, and Merritt stepped out onto the porch to breathe. The clearing was quiet. 12 cottages now, their windows warm against the dark. She could see people moving in some of them. A woman washing dishes, a man reading, 2 teenagers playing a card game at a kitchen table. Down the path in front of the 6th cottage on the right, Hazel was standing in the falling snow. She was not alone. A young girl stood beside her, very young, 15, maybe 16, thin. Her jacket was too big. She was holding a backpack against her chest with both hands. She had the exact grip. Merritt could see it even from the porch. Merritt walked slowly down the steps. The snow crunched softly under her boots. She did not go all the way to them. She stopped 10 feet back and stood quietly, so as not to intrude. Hazel saw her and gave her a small nod. The young girl was looking up at Hazel. "How long can I stay?" the young girl asked. Merritt stopped walking. She knew that question. Hazel smiled gently. She reached out and placed a hand very lightly on the girl's shoulder. "Long enough," Hazel said, "to stop being afraid of morning." The young girl did not speak. She looked at Hazel for a long moment. Then she looked past Hazel at the small warm cottage behind them, at the yellow light in the window, and something in the tight line of her shoulders loosened, and she began, quietly, to cry. Hazel walked her the rest of the way to the door. Merritt stood in the snow. She lowered her eyes as tears filled them. And she understood, standing there under the falling snow at 64 years old, although the number did not matter, and neither did the year, that Harlan had left her a house. She had made it a home, and now someone else was carrying that forward. She walked back up to the main house. She stopped in the doorway. She looked back once at the crescent of cottages in the falling snow. Every window was gold. Inside, she went upstairs. She opened the bedroom closet. The faded green backpack still hung on its hook behind her winter coat. The broken zipper still gaped. The strap was still frayed where it had rubbed against 15 years of concrete and brick and door frames. Once her entire life had fit inside it. Now it was empty. Merritt looked at it for a long time. Then she smiled, and she closed the closet door. Outside, the snow kept falling on Ashford Harbor, on the small houses, on the pines, On the dark road that led out to the mailbox at the end of the driveway, where the numbers 42 had been repainted 3 times over the years, so they would never fade again. Somewhere in the 6th cottage on the right, a young girl who had walked in carrying her whole life on her back was, for the first time in a very long time, taking off her shoes before she went to sleep, because she knew now where she would be in the morning. Maybe that is what a legacy really is. Not a house, not a name, not even a promise kept, though sometimes it is that too. Maybe a legacy is only this: that somewhere, on a cold night, someone is a little less afraid of tomorrow because you were here. Merritt Bennett had spent 15 years believing survival meant being ready to leave. Then a broken house on 18 acres of Maine woods had taught her a harder truth. Survival, in the end, was learning to stay. And staying, in the end, was how you became the home you had spent your whole life looking for.